Hey guys, welcome back to Dogforge. My name is Paul, and today we have a first in a new video series for you. That's right, we're doing tier listings. We're going to be starting off going through all of the feats, and then subsequently we'll do all of the subclasses for each class, and we'll see where it takes us from there. Today we're looking at PHB feats. So let's take a look. I do have a reference right next to me so I can make sure I'm not referencing something that is, been errated since, or my memory is leading me astray. I'm just using the tier maker website. I did make all the templates myself just to make sure that everything is included, and we are going S to D tier. I'm going to be trying to evaluate these feats in as fair a way as possible, where we're not just taking into account things like how appropriate is it for combat, which is probably the largest part of the game, let's be honest, but also how well does the feat achieve what it is setting out to. So we might end up, well, we're going to probably end up with some stuff down in D tier, but if your favorite feat does end up badly on the ranking, it's 5e, you're probably going to have a lot of fun with it regardless. So let's jump on into it. We don't have any fun pictures for these because it would be confusing. First up, we have Actor, which is a Charisma half feat that gives you an advantage on deception and performance to pass yourself off as somebody else, and lets you mimic the speech of another person. Now, for what it is, I think this feat is actually pretty good. The Charisma +1 does mean that you're able to fit this into your progression quite nicely, and particularly on charisma-based classes, most notably the Bard, you can just kind of seamlessly fit this in there and then really round out your ability to participate in the social pillar. So it does what it says it does, you can smoothly fit it in. I'm going to put this, honestly, I'm torn between A and S tier. It's definitely at least A. It makes you good at being an actor, on top of a good charisma score and proficiencies and whatnot. It does give you advantage. I'm gonna say A tier, just because ideally we would want maybe some expertise or something like that mixed in, or an ability to boost yourself otherwise besides just advantage. It could go either way. It is just on the line of S tier just for how well it achieves what it sets out to while still being really easy to pick up in your progression. Next up is Alert, and this just has to go up here. Initiative is very important in 5e, and with how swingy a d20 is, the bigger your fixed bonus the better. Even advantage can't save you from a low d20 sometimes, but a character with a decent to high dexterity modifier and a solid fixed bonus on top of that is normally going to be not at the bottom unless they're very unlucky. So alerts +5 is great. Not being surprise doesn't come up a whole deal, but it can certainly happen to you if you've not invested in your perception particularly well. It's a little bit DM dependent how much they use surprise. Some forget it, some prefer just not to deal with it. But the +5 initiative is amazing, and creatures not getting advantage on you as a result of being unseen really helps you deal with invisible creatures or creatures that are using obscurement. Perhaps if you're fighting a bunch of drow with native access to darkness, that kind of thing. So easy S tier, gives you a whole bunch of really nice stuff, but I think everyone knows Alert is good. Athlete, on the other hand, oh boy. Now this is interesting. So it's a half feat for strength or dex, so it's going to make it easy to fit into a physical centric character's progression, so primarily a martial. Climbing doesn't cost you extra movement, and you can make a running, long jump, or high jump after only moving 5 feet rather than 10. So we do have to bear in mind that it is a half feat, so we have to ask ourselves, are you getting enough that it's worth giving up a +1 to another ASI or the same ASI? The last one, shaving 5 feet off your running high or long jump, practically speaking, it does let you do those things with less room to move, and it does give you a little bit more movement to work with to actually achieve the jump or move after the jump. But that's a massive ribbon. It's not really going to come up much. This feat in general is something that you really have to make work. Climbing not costing you extra movement, okay, but it's still not a climb speed, which isn't that hard to get, to be honest. Especially with the Tasha's options for Ranger, or just picking a race like Tabaxi. Being prone only costing you 5 feet of your movement. Now this is great for things that knock you prone, like direwolves, but I think part of the hidden benefit of that is this feat is encouraging you to try and parkour everywhere. And when you try and parkour everywhere, there are going to be times where you fall on your butt. And this reduces the cost of falling on your butt somewhat. In light of it being a half feat, I'm going to give it... we'll give it a B. Because if you do want to play a really physical parkoury character, this does get you closer to that. But this is mostly being carried by the +1 to strength or dex. With 3 whole bullet points only making up for +1 that you're losing, that is really what's getting that bang slap in the middle. And this is really only advised to be taken if you're going to really try and make that kind of character concept work. So if you really want to play like something parkoury, but that wouldn't really be represented by a monk per se. Like you might want to portray the Arrow character from the newer series. That's got a lot of parkour in it, a lot of climbing, but you might not represent it as something like a Kensai monk, or you might just not want to. Then this is something that could help out with that. Moving on to Charger, which is a feat that I really want to like. When you use your action to dash, you can use a bonus action to make 1 melee attack or shove. And if you do that, and you've moved at least 10 feet in a straight line immediately beforehand, you get a +5 to the attack, or you push the target up to 10 feet away from you. Now, this potentially great, right? You are making it so that you are barring rolling a 1. Very likely to hit whatever you're attacking. +5 in a bounded accuracy system is a very significant bonus. It is worth roughly on average the benefit of advantage, but far more reliable and stacks with advantage. The shove boost to pushing 10 feet instead of 5 feet is not really worth it. That's very situational, so we're going to mostly regard this in terms of the +5 bonus to the attack. Oh wait, no, sorry, I have entirely misremembered and misread that. That's only +5 to the attack's damage roll. Which, no. This is just bad. Yeah, no, this is D tier. So this is kind of unsalvageable. This should be a half feat ideally, because it's just not going to work well. Most characters that are making weapon attacks are going to be gaining extra attack at some point, which means that you're foregoing your 5th level feature, a substantial boost in your power to use this. Specifying that you have to dash as an action and doing absolutely nothing for those that can dash as a bonus action, like Rogue and Monk, who will be making weapon attacks. And then the shove benefit's awful, the damage boost is okay, I guess, but kind of meh. Like, the best case scenario really for this is you get a free feat whilst you're playing in tier 1, or you really want to play a rogue that's headstrong and wants to rush in. Right, that's just a terrible niche for this feat. Yeah, it could have the potential to be a lot better. Heck, I would have probably rated this maybe a C had it been actually what I thought it was, which was the +5 to the actual attack roll, not the damage roll. But with it being +5 damage, this feat is pretty awful. It is D tier. Next up is Crossbow Expert. Now, Crossbow Expert has a bit of a weird niche. So, crossbows outside of tier 1 are not really usable for most people except artificers. However, this lets you ignore the loading quality so you can make multiple attacks with them. You also don't have disadvantage if you have a hostile within 5 feet of you. And when you take the attack action with a one-hand weapon, you can make a bonus action attack with a hand crossbow. Now, this is... well, there's a bit to pick apart here. So, the being within 5 feet of a hostile creature doesn't impose a disadvantage. That is both good for crossbow and bow, but it also does apply to any ranged attack, including spells. So there is kind of a niche to pick that up for this. Nowadays, with Tasha's Cauldron of Everything in play, Gunner would actually be a better feat for that. But this, especially in the context of the PHB, is a valid use of the feat, if a bit expensive. The loading quality of crossbows, whilst the crossbows do have very nice damage die, particularly the heavy crossbows D12, D12, D10, one of the two. Realistically, this feat is just going to be used with a hand crossbow, and it's just going to be used so that you can make a bonus action attack and get the other benefits. This is really what facilitates using a hand crossbow and it being worth anything. The ability to use extra attack with it, the ability to get a bonus action attack, because otherwise using a hand crossbow is kind of lackluster. It's got, for a crossbow, a low damage die and a pretty meh regular and long distance on it. So this is a good feat if you want to niche down into a hand crossbow, and it has some niche benefits otherwise. I have to rate this highly just because it does add a substantial piece of damage, as all bonus action attacks tend to do when you get a modifier to them. And it does stack with Sharpshooter. So you typically hear a lot about Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master, and then the other side of that coin is often Sharpshooter and Crossbow Expert. So it does what it says on the tin. It just... I kind of wish that this was better at incentivizing what I think it's meant to. I feel like it's meant to incentivize the kind of swashbuckling. I have a crossbow in one hand and a rapier in the other. But it doesn't really do that, because once you've fired off one shot with a loaded crossbow, you need a free hand to reload that, which isn't happening unless you're a Thri-Kreen, perhaps. Or you have a bunch of loaded hand crossbows, which is kind of iffy, depending on your DM, and you're just drawing and dropping them, and they're very expensive as weapons to be able to do that. I just wish that this just wasn't hand crossbow expert, which is what this is, because carrying around a big, almost ballista-like crossbow is a really great character concept that I wish was better supported in a more meaningful way, but ifs and buts, this is a very good feat. It does support multiple things. Bonus action attacks are good. It's just whether or not this is S or A. Yeah, we'll go with S tier because there is a lot of power here. Trying to let my bias of wanting it to do better to get in the way. Next up is Defensive Duelist, and this is our first feat with a prerequisite. You need a dex of 13 or higher, and to be able to use it you need to wield a finesse weapon in one hand and be proficient with it. When a creature attacks you with a melee attack, you can use your reaction to add your proficiency to your AC, so it's kind of like a martial equivalent of the shield spell, except there's no limit on the use, it's just one attack per reaction. Now this is potentially very good. I think that this is made to look a lot worse just because shield exists. And not just that shield exists, but as a first level spell on the Wizard and Sorcerer list, it is very easy to get a hold of, and it has trickled down to a lot of subclass lists on other classes as well. So that does have to bear in mind. Now, the main thing that this feat might conjure into your mind is like, using a rapier maybe, and skillfully parrying things away from you. It's worth noting that you can just use this with a dagger in your offhand if you want to fight in a different way but boost your defenses. I think this would be a perfect feat to be a half feat. I think that this was a +1 dex feat. This would actually be very good. It has built-in scaling, so that it stays pretty relevant. And even if it's just one attack, that can make quite a bit of difference. But given that it has the prerequisite, which means that it's not going to be as great for all characters, and given that it's once attack and it's not a half feat, whilst I personally like the flavor and the intent of it, I think realistically we're going to have to put it in B. Feels weird putting that next to athlete. Next up is dual wielder. So 2-weapon fighting gets a lot of slack, and hopefully I'm remembering to put a card like somewhere right here to the if 2-weapon fighting is viable video. Spoiler alert, it is. Dual wielder is, I mean, in the concept of 2-weapon fighting, it's pretty good. It gives you a +1 to your AC, which is always welcome, and in this instance is offsetting not being able to use a shield. It lets you, not only does it give you straight off the bat the ability to go from D6 weapons at best in each hand to a D8 weapon in each hand, so going from short swords to rapiers, which whilst that might sound silly, I think that is actually a thing that happened. I think one of the main benefits here with that bullet point is it does let you instead pick up and use pretty much any weapon that isn't two-handed or heavy, basically. Just because that, when we talk about 2-weapon fighting, one of the hidden benefits that can come up in certain campaigns, or just campaigns that run for a long time, is being able to leverage multiple magic weapons. Now, some people point that out as a downside. You need multiple magic weapons to make it work. But at the same time, you get to leverage multiple magic weapons, and if you can pick up and use, a longsword or a dagger, like, you can mix and match. You can use pretty much more items that may come up, especially with a lot of things defaulting to being longswords in the DMG. That makes 2-weapon fighting more viable, particularly in higher magic campaigns. And you can draw as though 2 one-handed weapons once, instead of having to do it one at a time or having one out already. That's just a nicety, just smoothing the action economy of using it. This isn't a huge damage boost for 2-weapon fighting, which I think is what most people want this to be. They look at 2-weapon fighting and they think that it's kind of lackluster because they have warped expectations. And so they see Great Weapon Master, Sharpshooter, Crossbow Expert, Polearm Master, and they want a feat for 2-weapon fighting, looking at those that will noticeably increase its damage the same way. That's not what this feat does. But I don't think people having warped expectations because of outlier feats, it makes this feat bad. This feat on its own does stand up just fine. And I think that whilst you don't need this feat as a 2-weapon fighter, I think this does provide a notable benefit and does flesh out 2-weapon fighting. And in the scope of what it means to do, which is enhance and make 2-weapon fighting a little easier, a little more viable than it already is, I think dual wielder does a good job. And I think I'm going to get some disagreements in the comments, but in the scope of what it does, and that it gives you such a great benefit, like a generic bonus to AC, I think it's an A. It's obviously not an S tier, but I think it does enough that it's an A. Now, Dungeon Delver. This is very campaign dependent. So it's going to give you advantage on perception and investigation to detect presence of secret doors, advantage on saves to resist traps, resistance to damage dealt by traps, and you get to travel at a normal pace without a penalty to passive perception. I don't think a lot of DMs even use that last one, even when they do dungeons, to be honest. Now, there are a lot of games where this feat would be amazing. I think in my own campaigns, this feat would see a decent amount of use. However, it is, even though secret doors and traps are very tropey hallmarks of D&D games, I don't think they come up enough. Even in published modules, I don't think they come up enough to warrant taking this. Now, if you're taking it because it fleshes out your character archetype, or you get a free feat, that is something else. And in terms of what it sets out to do, which is make you a better dungeon delver, it makes you a better dungeon delver. But the thing it sets out to do makes you very niche in a character. And you could end up having entire games, entire sessions, week after week after week, where this doesn't come up at all. And if that's the case, which it very much could be, given how niche this is, then I don't think that would feel good at all, and I think that does greatly detract from the feat. So just because it's so heavily niched down, I'm going to give this a B. It only gets as high as a B just because I think it does do the dungeon delver thing really well. But you need to know that you're going to be spending a lot of time in a tropey dungeon for it to actually be worthwhile. Durable. Durable is a feat that I want to like. It's a feat that I think has a place in some games. However, it's only really worth it if you're playing a game that is either using alternate resting, where you might run out of hit die, or alternate resting rules in general, where you might not regenerate both your health and hit die altogether. It's just, whilst I like it, and whilst it is a half feat, if you're going to be boosting con, there's probably other feats that you could take instead to boost it and get a different benefit, or you could just be boosting it fully. So whilst it does have a place in some harder, more resource scarce, in terms of, you know, how many encounters you're doing, how many rests you're getting kind of games, that is niche, and it is only one benefit on top of a +1, so that's a niche benefit. So I'm going to have to put this in C tier. The only reason it avoids a D is just because you do get that +1 con, which is always going to be valuable. Next up, Elemental Adept. A spell that I like but could be better. So when you pick it, you choose a damage type. You get to ignore resistance to that damage type when you cast spells. And when you roll damage, you get to treat any 1s as a 2. So now this is one of the few feats you can actually take multiple times to select multiple damage types. Generally speaking, that's not going to be worth it. However, lightning and thunder kind of go together, both mechanically in terms of features that boost them, and thematically. So you might want to do that for thunder and lightning damage, but that's a bit expensive unless you're getting free feats. So I think this is mostly a good feat. I would go as far as to say that if you want to play an elementally niche character, the one that comes to mind that I have played many times over is a Draconic Sorcerer, which, you know, it's a PHB subclass, or a Tempest Cleric, or Storm Sorcerer, you know, anything like that. Anything where you were really limiting yourself to a particular damage type for character and thematic reasons, you need to reduce the chances that your stick is not going to be countered or dramatically reduced by enemies. And I think that this is very important. So Elemental Adept, being able to ignore resistance, gets a big thumbs up. Being able to make your damage more reliable, I also like. Treating a 1 as a 2 isn't a huge damage increase, but I think it does insulate you from like really disappointing rolls to some degree. The only way that I wish this would be better is I wish it treated, or at least after a certain level, treated immunity as resistance. Because at the end of the day, you can take this, but let's say that you're a fire character. There are a lot of creatures that have fire immunity, and with this feat as it is raw, it's still useless. So, whilst I think this does support its archetype pretty well, because you can still be hard countered by immunity, I am going to... I'm going to put this as a B. It's not a half feat. Immunity still exists. Really, the rating this gets does depend on what element you choose. If you choose fire, then this is going to be going lower just because immunity is going to be more common. But as evaluating the feat as a whole, I think it's a fairly solid B. Grappler. I think this is the only one that's in the SRD. It's pretty bad. It has a prerequisite of 13 or higher, which means that a lot of established grappling builds that don't actually invest in strength, instead they invest in athletics, getting expertise or other ways of boosting that, because it's the most efficient and effective way of being a better grappler. Kind of get left out unless they are probably very unnecessarily and expensively boosting their strength. All for advantage on attack rolls against a creature you're grappling. Okay. And you can use your action to try and pin a creature grappled. And if you... Now, this isn't even a guarantee. This is a chance. And if you succeed, you're both restrained. Now, restrained is a great condition to impose on enemies. However, if you are also imposing that condition on yourself, and you spent an action to do it, that's hot trash. That is awful. There is no need for that to debuff you as well. And the fact that so that's just out the window straight away. That is nothing but baggage for this feat. The fact that it has a prerequisite, that, and then the only thing you get is advantage on attacking. Something which you can already simulate by proning them first with a shove and then grappling them. Something that you would also be very good at because you're still just making an athletics check. This is an awful feat. I think that when this was made, they weren't thinking about skill-based grapplers. They were thinking about brute strength, hence the prerequisite, and the prerequisite really just makes this awful for a lot of bards or rogues that might do grappling. And the restraining each other is terrible, and this is going to immediately join Charger in the D section. If you scrubbed the strength requirement and you gave this a +1 strength as a half feat, then maybe it could claw its way to a C just on the strength of the half feat. But as it is, that is atrociously designed. Next up is Great Weapon Master, and I'm going to do this. Now, a lot of people will rate Great Weapon Master extremely highly, and a lot of people will do a lot of math, make a lot of spreadsheets, all this kind of thing, to say when Great Weapon Master is worth using. Now, on this channel, I like to try and take a balance between optimization and realism. And the average player, even the average player that is going to try and optimize, isn't doing math for this, right? They're not charting out when it's worth using. They might get a feel for it, but maybe once upon a time D&D was primarily played by people with a higher affinity or liking for maths that would be more likely to do this recreationally. Nowadays there are a lot of people that like playing D&D, but the maths component is actually something they don't like. And with the prevalence of dice rollers and virtual tabletops that do a lot of the maths for you, I think more than ever, assuming that somebody is going to be aware of when the best time to use it is unrealistic, and I also think that it relies too much on knowing what the AC of the enemy is. There is a meta component of that. Sometimes a DM will say, sometimes a player will know what the monster is and meta that, knowing what their AC is to attack appropriately. However, I don't like relying on rating something because you know or you assume that you could easily find out what the AC is. There are times where you can quickly guess, but there are also times where all the previous attacks against that monster have either been really high or really low, and you have no idea what the actual AC is. And that is why I am holding this back at A, in addition to, unlike Sharpshooter, there's no fighting style that just straight bumps accuracy for heavy weapons. Now, the easiest case for boosting accuracy in this regard is advantage with something like a samurai or a barbarian, but I think that just the fact that you're going to be missing probably more often than you think, this is going to be an A tier. I've seen Great Weapon Master in play. I've seen it decimate monsters. I've also seen it turn hits into misses when the normal hit would have still killed the monster. The bonus action attack when you score a crit or kill a creature, I think that's a nice bonus. And that is worth something. But I don't think personally Great Weapon Master is S tier, even though it is one of the feats that when you take it to its optimizing maximum, does really become a bit distorting of the game. Now, healer. I love me healer. There is going to be a little bit of bias here. I love healer. I love healing characters. I love healing characters that do not do the yo-yoing thing. Even though healer does allow you to do that, it also gives you a decent sized heal that you can use multiple times a day, just with a short rest in between, that does scale decently, appreciably. So I personally prefer to use that big heal. I should probably say what the feat does. You need a healer's kit to use healer, which is unsurprising. This is mundane healing, but a healer's kit is extremely cheap. It shouldn't be particularly hard to find. It is just on the equipment list and isn't magical. It's about 5 silver, I believe. And you can either use an action and a healer's kit charge to bring somebody back up to 1 hit point from 0, or you can spend an action, heal them fully, and by fully I mean a d6 plus 4 plus their level. It's actually number of hit dice, but it's just easier to think of what the level is. I think this is a good feat. Now, reading through it by raw, using the big heal does shut down the bringing people up to 1 hit point, which is something to bear in mind. However, this is also mundane healing, so it will work in anti-magic fields, it can't be counterspelled, it is more reliable in a lot of ways. So, I don't think it's S tier, I think it's held back from S tier. It's going to be A or B, and I think that the cheapness of the resource and how nice the healing formula is, and the ability to yo-yo if you are so inclined, does make this an A. Now, it's worth noting that healer is particularly good on a thief that could use fast hands to do it as a bonus action, which is a particular niche. However, it does make it stand out, and I think everybody who takes healer will be a decent healer in and of themselves. Next up we have heavily armored, and I am just going to do this. So why is it a C? It's a C because getting a +1 to an ability score makes me not rated a D. If you are taking this, then you have proficiency with medium armor, which is the prerequisite. If you have proficiency with medium armor, then that means you should have at least a +2 dexterity, so you can actually get the most out of it. So what this is doing is, unless you take this feat at first level somehow, like a variant human custom lineage free feat, unless you take this at first level, you are just wiping away a big purpose of the dexterity you invested in. Dexterity is still very powerful, but it's kind of like just flying in the face of that. And when you can just get heavy armor by having your first level in fighter or paladin, or taking a dip into one of the far too many clerics that get it as part of their domain, I I don't see who is taking this feat. Whilst I understand the logic of having feats that increase your ability to get proficiencies in armor usage, I just don't see a realistic case where people are going from medium to heavy armor outside of situations where it is character driven, or you're in a campaign where you found a really cool set of magical plate armor, right? There's just no purpose. Because like at best, over medium armor using half plate, you're just getting a +1 AC and spending a lot more gold and an ASI. It's not good. It is not good at all. But heavy armor master, this has a prerequisite of having proficiency with heavy armor. As far as prerequisites go, that's kind of so what. Yeah, you increase your strength by +1. If you're wearing heavy armor, you are going to need a certain amount of strength to avoid that movement penalty unless you're a dwarf, and you're probably wearing heavy armor because you want to use strength with weapons, so that's good. Being able to reduce bludgeoning, piercing and slashing damage by 3. Now it does say non-magical. I think that's entirely unnecessary. One, it doesn't really make sense to differentiate between magical and non-magical in how well you use your armor. And two, just a lot of monsters don't have magical attacks to begin with, so it a lot of the time won't come up unless you've given a monster a magic weapon to act as loot. I guess like the one thing is that if you come across like a spell attack that will do BPS damage, maybe. Those also aren't super common, so that's also kind of meh. But reducing damage by 3 every time you're attacked, that's huge. In tier 1, that can make you feel like a god as you have all of these goblins like wailing on you and you're reducing a substantial amount of their damage. This dramatically increases your durability as a character and massively helps out with the whole I'm invincible in this armor scenario. From a purely thematic point of view, I kind of wish bludgeoning wasn't included, because smacking somebody in plate with a hammer to concuss them is kind of how you do it, but I think this is a good feat. I think having the +1 really helps. You could argue that at higher levels, the flat 3 isn't really doing much, and maybe this should be a proficiency bonus thing, especially since you are effectively just using the armor better. Proficiency would make sense. But even a flat 3, especially as monsters get multi-attack more and more, that's still pretty good. It's still saving you a noticeable amount of hit points. So with that in mind, it does a good job of what it's meant to do. Greatly increases your durability. Ooh, this might be controversial, but I'm feeling it does what it does. It does it well. It can really change how a character plays. I think that's A tier. Not good enough to be S tier, but it's a really good feat when you use it. Inspiring Leader. Now you're going to need a charisma of 13 or higher, and if you spend 10 minutes shoring up resolve with your teammates, then you can give up to 6 creatures within 30 feet who can see and hear you and understand you, so not your wild random animals. You can give them temp HP equal to your level plus your charisma modifier. You can only give somebody this per short or long rest. Now, this is a fantastic feat. I think most people know this is a fantastic feat. It is very commonly recommended. This is obviously going to be best on charisma first characters, so your bard, sorcerer, warlocks. Particularly with bard, it does lend into the orator, the charismatic, just assumption that you get with a lot of bards. The temp HP amount, level plus charisma. This is obviously going to depend on how much you've invested in your charisma, but it means that it's going to scale well. The use of the charisma modifier means that if you get this early on into like tier 1, it's still going to be a decent amount of temp HP for your level. And on the higher end, your level is then going to start carrying it a bit more. It allows you to use up to 6 friendly creatures. So realistically, that means that you can handle a larger than average party, but it also means that you can handle an average party with some companions or critters like that. 1 second, I've been talking a long time and need to sip. Casting hydration is effective. So, I think a really good strong use case for this as well is giving companion creatures temp HP to make them more durable. For example, if you're a warlock and you're a Pact of the Chain, this is a fantastic way to make your familiar a lot more beefy, especially with Atash's invocation that lets you like raise their attack better. So this is easily an S tier feat. I will say that Inspiring Leader, whilst it is very good, in the current landscape of the game, it is somewhat less appealing just because at one point Wizards of the Coast just kind of went, hey, everybody should have temp HP. Which is kind of ridiculous, but it's still a great feat. Keen Mind. +1 intelligence, you always know which way is north, how many hours until the sunrise or sunset, and you can accurately recall anything you've seen or heard within the past month. It's a C. I love this feat. I have taken this feat. I've taken it on when I played a Mystic. I think that it is very flavorful. I think it can really reinforce a certain character type, and I think it can be really fun to roleplay and nichely be useful in certain scenarios in exploration or social pillars. But it is, at the end of the day, a +1 intelligence and then 3 incredibly niche ribbon features. That is a weak feat. It's interesting, but it is still weak enough that I don't think it warrants a B. Now, had they given us something that was perhaps a bit more applicable in one of the pillars, something that you could use more in exploration or social pillars even, not even combat, this might have made a B. As it is, it's just too ribbony. Although, personally, it's fun if you can afford, like, if you've got an odd intelligence as an intelligence character, it's really fun. So, this is a case of something that isn't rated well, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't necessarily take it. Lightly armored. You gain proficiency with light armor. There is no real reason to use this. You also get to bump your strength or dex by +1, which means that this will be going C minimum, but there's just no real reason to use this. The only classes that don't get light armor proficiency are sorcerers and wizards. And those both get access to mage armor, which is better. The sorcerer has less spells known, but they also have a subclass that offers them mage armor level AC with the draconic sorcerer. Combine that with how a not unsubstantial amount of races can give you proficiency in light armor. I just don't see who's taking this or why. I'm gonna put it in C. No, I'm gonna break a rule. I'm gonna put this in D. Even though this gives you a +1 to your strength or dex, it's awful. It is really awful. The only time you would ever consider this is if you're playing a sorcerer or a wizard and you find a really cool set of magic light armor that nobody else wants or can use. That's it. Even then, your dexterity is not going to be high enough to make the best of it, and you've probably been using mage armor up until that point or a subclass feature, which is then going to become entirely redundant when you take this. You know, at best, as a sorcerer, you're able to swap that out when you level up, which means you can't swap out another spell. It's just a terrible, terrible feat. Linguist. You learn 3 languages of your choice. You can increase your int by 1, and you can create ciphers. This is a fun feat. It just, the premise is very simple. Make you better at languages. 3 languages is just enough in the grand scope of how many languages are in D&D, and in light of languages you get from your character, that you can feel like somebody really good at languages. Creating ciphers is not only cool, but it is potentially very helpful in the social pillar. Boosting your intelligence by 1 means that you can take it as an intelligence using character without feeling too bad about shoring up this character aspect. So whilst I don't think this is... No, I'll put this as a B. I'll put this as middle of the road because it is achieving what it is setting out to do. Creating ciphers is useful enough in the social pillar that it can actually be used. And it's not something like... It would obviously be more useful in certain campaigns like social intrigue, or political intrigue. But you can find uses and make that work in pretty much every game. So it's fun. It's still enough to be useful. Middle of the road B. Lucky. Put that in A. So this just lets you re-roll something 3 times. It's really the gist of it. Online, you might see a lot of people going, lucky, lucky, or assuming characters have lucky. Lucky is useful. Lucky is also boring and is not guaranteed to help you. You are just rolling the dice again, and if you're using this, it's because the dice screwed you the first time. And this is the thing about like actually rolling dice, actually using probability. Even though you could say like you're more likely rolling more dice to get the result that you want, you are also very likely to just get the result you don't want again. So lucky, it's useful, but it is boring, and it's not guaranteed to actually help you. And that's why it gets gated out of S tier, but it is good enough and useful enough to be an A. Mage Slayer. It's not a half feat, which I wish it was, but when a creature within 5 feet of you casts a spell, you can use your reaction to make a melee attack against them. When you damage a creature concentrating, they have disadvantage to maintain its concentration, and you have advantage on saves against their spells. So what is this trying to achieve? You're better at hunting spellcasters. How good is this? Honestly, it depends on your campaign. If you are playing a character that has something hinging on hunting mages, I would hope your DM would at least tell you that this is going to be a bad idea, but we can't rely on that. So this does make you better. This encourages you to get in their face. So you need to both be a mage hunter, a martial, and a melee martial. So I think just because it is very niche in multiple ways, this does end up as a B, but if you know that you're going to be in a campaign fighting a lot of spellcasters, I think this is a very valuable option. Next up in the line is Magic Initiate. Magic Initiate, I think, looks worse in the current landscape of the game because we have had such a degree of power creep with magic feats in particular. Whereas before, we have Magic Initiate and some others, which is like you can have a cantrip. You can have 2 cantrips and a spell, but you can only cast that once per day unless you already could know the spell, right? Magic was much more closely guarded when the PHB came out. Since then, the floodgates have opened, and now you have things like Fey Touched and Shadow Touched, giving you a 2nd level and a 1st level spell that you can cast with your spell slots, and you can bump whatever mental you want as well. It's kind of gone crazy, and that does make it a little harder to evaluate this. I think Magic Initiate has its place. I think that it is best used for getting cantrips, unless you are picking something from your own spell list. Right? An example of this would be the Sorcerer, right? This is a fantastic way for a Sorcerer to learn Shield. They're going to want to learn Shield anyway. They don't have a lot of spells known. And whilst they have the same number of spell slots as every other caster, and they could make more flexible casting, getting a free casting means you have a more reliable access to Shield, and you can potentially cannibalize those other slots for sorcery points. That is a good use case. Otherwise, another use case is going to be gathering stuff like blade cantrips. Green Flame Blade, Booming Blade. If you're primarily looking at this to get a casting with a 1st level spell, It may do what you want, but unless you can cast it with like your spell slots, if you have any, it's not a fantastic use. So I'm going to put this in B with the addendum that if you are choosing from your own list, or you do want cantrips, most notably like distorting cantrips like the blade trips or guidance and stuff like that, that might push it to an A, but generally speaking it's a B, especially nowadays. Martial Adept. Gain 2 maneuvers from the Battlemaster archetype. You get a D6 once per short rest. Okay. This is weaker than a Battlemaster doing their thing normally. D6 instead of a D8. I think that this is a good feat for Battlemasters to take. It gives them more options, which since Tasha's came out and added more, especially social uses for maneuvers, I think that's great. It gives them another superiority dice. Now, whilst there are 2 ways to read this. It can either be a D6 at first, or you can just add it to your D8s. Regardless how you and your DM handle that, when you get the improvements later on, it will increase as all of the other superiority dice do, because those features do not distinguish from where your superiority dice come from. So this is best on a Battlemaster to make them even better Battlemasters. You might want to consider taking it on a fighter otherwise, just because they have so many ASIs and Battlemaster maneuvers can really be good. Especially, like, you might want to pair it along with the fighting style that gives you like a maneuver. I'm going to say that Martial Adept is C tier for characters in general. If you're a Battlemaster, it's easily B tier. Easily. If you're a higher level Battlemaster that's bumped your superiority dice, then maybe even touching the bottom of A tier, just because it's letting you dump more dice and more effects. Medium Armor Master, I like this. You can use half plate without disadvantage, and you can use a +3 instead of a +2 whilst you're calculating your AC. I think that this supports a more armored dexterity first archetype better, and I think that it achieves it pretty well. I think where this gets hard is that it's not a half feat, so you have to really choose between bumping your progression or not, which means that it's most likely going to be relegated to free feats, like first level feats, or later in the game where you've already boosted your stats to what you want. I think it suffers from that. However, I do like it as a feat. I do think it has a place in the world, but just because of how it's designed encouraging that, I am going to put it at C. I wish it came with a +1 dexterity. Mobile, very good feat, A tier. Easy. Increasing your speed by 10 feet, dashing through difficult terrain, and being able to make hit and runs. It's a great feat. Now, you can use this on a monk. I think it's a good option on the monk. Sometimes people might regard it as a trap option because monks are fast anyway. Being faster is always better. You have to be really fast for it to be a case where you're not actually benefiting from stuff. Even a monk is not going to be fast enough where they're guaranteed to be able to hit and run out of range of reproach until higher level. So getting that 10 feet can be great, especially in tier 1 and tier 2. Being able to hit and run effectively is great. One of the more creative uses I've seen of this is a druid using wild shape with, I think, an elk or a giant elk or something to hit and run, knocking people prone and then running away with the higher movement speed of being an animal on top. It's just a great fun feat. It's great for rogues as well, or anyone that wants to be a skirmisher. Easily A tier. I just don't think it's quite got enough oomph to be S tier. Moderately armored. Now, the thing about moderately armored is that it's both a half feat and it gives you access to shields. That's where this is kind of Now, proficiency with medium armor is a step up from light armor if you are a dexterity character primarily. Medium armor would really elevate your AC, but shields are crazy because shields in 5e is a lot of the time you might as well just wear them, especially as a spellcaster, which means that classes like Warlock and even like Rogue can really get a lot out of this. But probably even worse is if you get something like a Sorcerer or a Wizard getting light armor from a race, or even taking lightly armored before this, because shields really push ACs on casters to places where they shouldn't be. So because this is a half feat and it is distorting, I'm going to put this in A tier just because even though it's niche, if you are taking this feat, it is going to substantially benefit you whilst fitting into your progression. That is a big deal. Mounted combatant. Holy niche, Batman. So, while you're mounted and incapacitated, you have advantage on attack rolls against unmounted creatures smaller than your mount. You can force an attack against your mount to target you instead. And if your mount is subjected to an effect for a dex save, you basically give it evasion. Now, if you're using a mount as a regular part of your experience, this is a decent to good feat to take. However, there are caveats here. The only class that can really reliably do this is the Paladin. You could argue the Bard could use magical secrets, blah blah blah. Whilst that is technically true, it is unrealistic. The Paladin is the real use case here, because mundane mounts are, potentially expensive for low-level characters. They are more likely to die. They are harder to control. I think this is primarily for Paladins. Now, where this gets tricky is that one of the benefits, forcing an attack against you instead of your mount, increasing the durability of your mount substantially, specifies that the target has to be smaller than your mount, which means that you're not realistically going to be getting this benefit as a small character, unless because one of the great things that you can do with Fine Steed is have a Mastiff, ride it as a small character, and then you have the benefits of being mounted whilst still being on a creature small enough that it can be nimble in most battlefields without having to squeeze or having problems against multiple attacks of opportunity because they occupy a bigger area. So being so niche and locking out all of the getting the full benefit from some of the characters in that niche really hurt this. If you have a free feat, or you know that you're going to be on top of your steed most of the time in combat, it can be good. But I'm going to put this in C just because it's so niche. Now bear with me. We are most of the way through. You've been here almost an hour now, so if you've gotten this far and YouTube statistics say you're special for getting this far, then you may as well finish, right? Right? After all, you've been this observant so far, why not continue? Speaking of observant, so you get to increase your int or wisdom by +1. You can read lips if you can see somebody's mouth when they're talking, and you get a +5 to your passive perception and intelligence. So the primary thing that lifts this feat up is being able to boost int or wisdom. It means that it slides into progression quite nicely, and by being able to boost wisdom, it makes it more usable on a wisdom character who is already going to have a high passive perception. This is the kind of thing where you take this feat and you end up with a passive perception in the 20s because it's just crazy. However, it gets a B. Why does it get a B? Because at the end of the day, having a stupid high passive perception is not super helpful. At the end of the day, if you're facing an ambush, that just means you won't get surprised. Boosting your own primary stats, great. It's just not great enough additional benefits to really elevate this to A or above. Polearm Master. It's an S tier. Why is it an S tier? Because bonus action attacks with the modifier attached are very powerful. They just are. That is the primary reason. There is also a niche thing here where you can use a shield and a staff or a spear and still get the bonus action attack. I'm just going to say it, right? That's stupid. The feat explicitly says that you are using the opposite end of the weapon. So that makes that really mentally stupid. Like, twisting it around, like if you're using a spear, it's mentally it's stupid. Mechanically, it's really good. So I have to take that into account and rate it. It's just a bit distasteful. And the other benefit, whilst you have a glaive, halberd, pike, quarterstaff, spear, and I believe tridents probably count for this now, other creatures provoke an opportunity attack when they enter your reach when you have that weapon equipped instead of leaving your reach only. This is going to be more useful for, having a polearm that gives you the reach, like glaive or halberd. But if you're just using a quarterstaff or a spear, still useful. Pairs well with Sentinel, because it means that as they come in, you can lock down their movement. It's just, it's an S tier feat. It is. I wish it wasn't so... I wish it wasn't how it is, just because it is a bit silly at times. The mental image of spinning like whatever weapon you have is a little in some instances, and it is distorting to the point where you get people that are like Great Weapon Master and Polearm Master, which they go together. That bonus action attack might only be a D4, but you could add plus 10 to it, or any other additive damage like smites, Battlemaster maneuvers. You get like certain camps where martials are only valued or competitive if they have something like Great Weapon Master and PAM. That's not that. No, it's unrealistic expectations. It's not what the game expects. It's not what most modules or DMs expect, and there are plenty of ways to make a capable martial. I don't like what this feat has done to the game. However, it is a powerful feat. Resilient. Increase one chosen ability score by 1 to a max of 20. Proficiency in a saving throw using that ability. This is going to be... Come on. It's going to be B. Why is it going to be B? Now, when people talk about this feat, they only really ever talk about 2 saving throws. Either Constitution for concentration saving throws on casters, or they're talking about Wisdom saves on martials. To get the full benefit of this feat, you need to have a character with an odd score in whatever it is, and then you really need those things to come up. It is easier for things to come up for concentration as a caster because you're going to get hit. As much as some people like to assume they can avoid everything if they're just not on melee range, you are going to get hit. The wisdom thing is where this trips up, because wisdom saving throws can be debilitating, but they don't really become common or particularly debilitating until you start really getting up in levels. At low levels, you could face that cultist that has hold person, I guess, but it's early levels, like, that's the biggest threat you're really facing. And what I think this really is doing a disservice is that there are 6 ability scores. There are 6 save proficiencies. You most likely only have proficiency in 2 of them. I don't think wisdom saves are such a big deal why this is a big grab. You must have this. I don't think so. Nor do I think that you must have this as a spellcaster. Primarily because when are you taking this, right? If you're variant human, you're trading out other feats you could be taking, you're trading out racial abilities you could be benefiting from. And if you're taking it, in the actually played levels for most people, you're foregoing increasing your maximum, maxing your primary spellcasting ability. So a lot of the time this is going to be shunted unless you get a free feat. This is going to be shunted off into tier 3 and beyond, except in like certain circumstances. I think this is a feat that is talked about more than it's actually taken. I think that this is a feat that can be potentially good, but you know, I don't think many people take this for strength. But you know what? Some of like the more common and devastating strength, ability scores, saving throws are strength. Because strength often knocks you prone, which means that you're going to get attacked at advantage, and you're less likely to be able to get away, or you're going to be grappled and restrained potentially, or you're going to be swallowed potentially. Like, this is just so niche, only giving a single proficiency. I understand why saving throws are powerful proficiencies to have, but realistically, I just don't think that this feat is all that it's chalked up to be. I think it's more hype than anything else. Now, Ritual Caster. This is a fun feat. Prerequisite, Intelligence or Wisdom 13 or higher. You get a Ritual Casting book that gives you 2 first level rituals of your choice from the Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock or Wizard list. And if you come across spell books or spell scrolls later with rituals in them, you can add them in. This is a fun way to add a bit of magic onto a character, or a bit of ritual magic onto a character that doesn't have ritual casting, like a sorcerer. So it's fun. I do find the prerequisite a little irksome. I understand that the intent is to, make it so that you're, I guess, more of a studious caster. But a prerequisite of 13 or higher realistically means you probably have a 14, because odd stats are dead stats. And I think that's unnecessarily harsh, because like, I might want to take this as a sorcerer or as a fighter or something. I think the prerequisite is a little high. I think only getting 2 rituals is a little bit harsh. I think it leans a little bit too much on being able to learn rituals from other sources. Now, if you have another ritual caster of some kind, like a tome lock that's taken the ritual casting invocation, or you have a wizard that has a spell book they can lend you, then yeah, maybe. Or you're in a world where you know for a fact you can come across these things or pay to copy them, sure. I think this is fun, but I think it's held back by the prerequisite and the overall value. So I think Ritual Caster does go in the C tier. Not C as in throwing the feet in the ocean, that would be terrible. Next up we have Savage Attacker. Once per turn, when you roll damage for a weapon attack, you can reroll the weapon's damage dice and use either total. That's bad. Now, don't get me wrong, there are times where, like, you make an attack with like a D10 or a D12 or a 2D6 weapon, and you roll badly on the damage, and it sucks. Or you get a crit, and you roll badly on the damage, that sucks. But you know what else sucks? This feat. That is the only benefit you get, and whilst you can use that every turn, there is no reason whatsoever why this shouldn't be a half feat. If this was a half feat boosting strength or dex, then this would easily, like, minimum C tier, but maybe even B tier, because that means that you can more reliably average out your damages higher every turn. Now, it's only once per turn, so this is going to be higher value for, like, rogues, and it's going to age particularly badly for fighters who are both getting more attacks with extra attack and action surge. But as it stands, nobody should take this feat. It is terrible. Sentinel. When you hit a creature with an opportunity attack, the creature's speed becomes 0 for the rest of the turn. Creatures provoke opportunity attacks from you even if they disengage. And when a creature within 5 feet of you makes an attack against a creature other than you, and that target doesn't have this feat, you can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against the attacking creature. Something important to note is that attack, attacking somebody attacking your ally, it is a reaction attack. It is not an opportunity attack. It does not play with the rest of the feat. And there have been instances where I've had players that use this feat that are like smacking with the reaction because they want to get that attack in, And what that does is that lets my monster just leave, move around, get to the caster on the back line, create some distance if they want to. Just because, like, yes, they got hit, but if they didn't die, then they're not locked down by that character anymore. So that is something you need to keep in mind when you have this feat. How good is the feat in general? Well, it is an easy A tier. Easy A tier. There's just so much value here. If you're playing a melee character, now don't get me wrong, there is going to be some DMs that aren't going to provoke opportunity attacks, either because they don't think to, or because they're trying to game that a little bit. So this is a little table dependent, but this is a great feat and it does pair well with Polearm Master. Sharpshooter. That is S tier. Now, you do get the -5 to get the +10, but the archery fighting style exists and makes that a -3, which is well worth losing for the +10. Now, the intent of the archery style is to offset cover that you get from shooting into melee, but realistically, when you also have a feat that ignores 1/2 and 3/4 cover, they go together so well. And this one in particular, the range that most characters using this feat will have is longer than the realistic range of combats. There is like some theorycraft and white rooming that talks about like these crazy distances and kiting from hundreds of feet. As a DM that has run games for probably hundreds of people at this point in 5e, battle maps ain't that big. That extreme range, not a big deal. You know what is a big deal? Reliably not getting disadvantage when like somebody's just outside of your range. You know when that's a biggest deal? When you're using a hand crossbow with Crossbow Expert because you wanted that bonus action attack. Now you're not limited to 30 feet, you can go the full 120. This pairs particularly well with Crossbow Expert, but it's great for any archer that has the archery style. Even if you don't have the archery style, which you can get from a feat nowadays as well, or just dipping one level in fighter, I think that this is still probably worth it just because it does make your weapon use far more reliable. It is game distortingly good, and Sharpshooter ends up in S tier. Shield Master. Don't worry, the end is in sight. There is not that many left. Believe me, I want this video to end at this point too. My voice hurts. Maybe this should have been a 2-parter, but here we are. We can do this together. Shield Master. So you need to wear a shield, obviously. When you take the attack action on your turn, you can use a bonus action to try and shove a creature within 5 feet of you. I do believe that there is a Jeremy Crawford ruling on this. It might actually be in the Sage Advice Compendium. I don't know off the top of my head. But basically the gist is that the intent is that you attack first, shove later. That's stupid and devalues the feat, but that is the rules as intended. If you are incapacitated, you can add the shield's AC to your dex saving throws as you basically hide behind the shield. That's pretty good. By standard, that's going to be a +2, but if you have a magical shield, which is easiest to attain as an artificer, or have an artificer in the party, then that's going to mean that your magic items are going to scale with your feat, which is cool. And if you're subjected to an effect that, makes a dex saving throw to take half damage, you can use your reaction to take no damage if you succeed. So this is like evasion, but with a reaction tax. I don't think the reaction needed to be there. This is a good feat. I think ideally you should be able to shove first, and I think ideally this should have a bullet point that lets you use a shield as a D4 weapon. Because people want to play Captain America. And even if people don't want to play Captain America, smacking somebody with a shield makes sense. Smacking them with a bash, or just taking that thin edge and ramming it into somebody's cranium, that makes sense. It's something that has probably happened for thousands of years. there should be something in here that lets you use a shield as a low damage dice weapon. But the benefit's great. This is particularly good for strength-based characters that haven't invested in dexterity and are more liable to get messed up by dex saves like fireballs and certain dragon breaths. But particularly if you can't shove beforehand, I think this is a B. It is a niche. You need to have both the shield. You need to. It's going to cost you a reaction if you want to take no damage, which you might have already spent. It's good if you are the right character for it. I just don't think it's good enough to be not middle of the road. Skilled. You gain proficiency in any 3 skills or tools of your choice. B. Pretty simple. 3 skills is a lot. It is particularly a lot if you are a rogue with an additional ASI and you have reliable talent. That is a standout case for this, as is a fighter who has a lot of ASIs and might want to just shore up their out of combat utility. Does what it says on the tin. B. Skulker. Skulker is particular. So you can try and hide when you are lightly obscured from the creature for which you are hiding. When you are hidden from a creature and miss it, it doesn't reveal your position. You're no longer hidden. And dim light doesn't impose disadvantage on your perception checks. So this is kind of weird. This is kind of both evoking kind of sniping and Batman vibes. I think the whole lightly obscured thing is just going to make a lot of people argue over rules and look in the book or Google. I think that this is not going to come up a lot of the time. It's most likely going to come up for rogues bonus action hiding as ranged attackers, which is, mostly applying to a single class is already a niche, but that is like a niche within a niche. And then dim light doesn't impose disadvantage on your perception checks relying on sight. That is... most likely not going to be good. This is best for if you want to avoid using light in dark situations. As if dim light doesn't impose. So I think that would also apply to dark vision in darkness. This is just... especially with a prerequisite of Dex 13 or higher, this is just incredibly niche. And whilst I fully acknowledge that there are certain types of games where this could be valuable, it is so niche and so, I think, lackluster even within its niche that it warrants that D rating so much. Next up, Spell Sniper. So you're going to get... basically, like Sharpshooter, you spell attacks ignore half and 3/4 cover. That's nice. When you cast a spell that requires an attack roll, the spell's ranged is double. And when you get 1 attack roll based cantrip from the Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard list. See, I'm not going to say D tier. This can be nice, particularly where you're elongating the distance. You can use cantrips to have nice rider effects. Typically how balance in 5e goes is that if a cantrip does nothing but damage, it gets a larger damage dice and further range. If it has a rider effect like shutting down healing or reducing speed, it is going to have a lower distance. I think that this is cool. I think that it's hilarious that you can use this with the Eldritch Sniper on to get a Eldritch Blast that goes out to like 600 feet or something, that with a Meta Magic you can push to 1200. Like, that's hilarious to me. I think that getting a cantrip period is valuable, which is really helping here. I think this warrants a C, but I don't think it's a particularly strong feat. It's more a niche, a cool thing to do, and you really need to have a particular kind of DM that is going to let you really work with those extreme ranges for it to really be valuable. Tavern Brawler. You get proficiency with improvised weapons. Unarmed strikes are a D4. When you hit a creature with an unarmed strike or improvised weapon, you can use a bonus action to grapple, and you can increase your strength or con by 1 to a max of 20. I like this feat. It kind of does what it's meant to. You're meant to be able to, like, brawl like in a tavern fight scene, and it does that. The fact that you can increase your strength or con by +1 means that it's pretty easy to get this with a relatively low cost. It's not hindering your progression that much, so to speak. So I think this is valuable. I think what really hurts this feat is that the unarmed fighting style now exists, which is easier to get if you want to focus on unarmed strikes, and is going to be better for making unarmed strikes. If you're taking Tavern Brawler, I would say don't hyper focus on unarmed strikes. I would say if you're going to take this, either do it as a character thing, that's just how you want your character to be. Mechanically, make sure you're very good at grappling. Invest in your athletics. So whether that's, expertise or something else, just make sure you're very good at it, because I think this is the highlight of the feat. Given that you get so much value, I'm gonna put this in A, just because it does what it's meant to very well. You're meant to be a brawler. It makes you a brawler. It gives you that +1, which makes it a lot of value for what you're losing out versus a normal ASI. It's, I think, a mostly well-designed feat, and I think it deserves that A rating. Tough. Now, there is going to be a lot of talk in the optimization community that the best defenses are going to be high saving throws. They're going to be, high ACs. You know what the best defense in 5e is? Period. Hit points. Because how does the enemy really win? By reducing you to dead. What stands between that? Hit points. Even things that can just snuff you out, like Power Word Kill, it has a hit point threshold. If you fail that save against hold person and you're paralyzed, not only could that have happened anyway with resilient wisdom, they still have to kill you. They still have to go through your hit points. And hit point damage can happen out of combat. You can get hit by, foolish actions. I've seen players do a lot of stupid stuff. But you also can have times where you get damaged by traps. Having more hit points is always valuable. And this is a way of getting twice as many hit points as you would if you boosted your constitution. More so, it's a way of boosting your hit points beyond the limits of your constitution. You can have a +5 con if you want, and this on top, and you can have a bucket of hit points. The only real limitation here is that it is only increasing your hit points, and you still have to heal those hit points with your hit dice. So if you get into a situation where you are going to be, you roll low, let's say, or you just roll particularly average, you could realistically run out of hit dice on a short rest. I don't think that's a huge concern. I don't think that's a really notable concern, because one, a lot of people like playing bards, and bards get Song of Rest. But two, even if you run out of hit dice, there are other ways to heal, and most people never run out of hit dice because they're taking probably one short rest maximum a day. Even two, it might last out. I think this is a fantastic feat. In acknowledgement of the hit dice short rest problem, I think that this is only an A. But being able to just grab a bunch of hit points, it's a great defense. Warcaster. Advantage on concentration saves when maintaining concentration, con saves to maintain concentration. You can perform the somatic components of spells even when you have weapons or shields in one or both hands. This is pretty great. And when you have an opportunity attack, you can use a spell if it has a casting time of 1 action and can only target 1 creature. or you must only target that creature with it. This is a pretty good one. It has a prerequisite of only casting at least one spell, but as far as prerequisites go, it's not one. You wouldn't benefit from this if you couldn't cast a spell anyway. I think that this is a feat that is good. I think that it is a feat that gets overrated. I think that this is a solid B. I don't think opportunity attacks running away from a caster is something that's going to come up enough unless you are actively making it happen with something like Dissonant Whispers. And I think that most casters aren't going to have a shield on their arm to worry about it. So in light of all of those things, it is easily a B. But if you are a caster that has solid attack spells to use on your opportunity attack, and you have a shield and a weapon, and you can't already use, use them effectively, like a cleric has less of a hindrance from this because of holy symbols, there's some real value, but the niche, and I think the value gets overstated, makes this a B. And finally, Weapon Master. Strength or Dex by +1. Gain proficiency with 4 weapons of your choice. That's bad. It's really bad. I'm going to put this here. Considering you can get weapon proficiencies from races that you can, when you get martial weapon proficiency, you get all martial weapons. Like the amount of characters that want to take this feat is so minuscule that even being able to boost your strength or dex by +1 does not save this from D. This is a terribly designed feat. This doesn't make you a weapon master. This makes you weapon capable. And less weapon capable than a first level fighter, to be blunt. Ideally, if I was to say, like, what should a weapon master thing be? Probably looks more like the Crusher Piercer. I can't remember what the other one. It's been a long video. But it would look more like that. It would look more like a half feat that gave you additional cool stuff to do. It certainly wouldn't be 4 weapon proficiencies. It's an awfully designed feat. And with that, with 1 hour 27 minutes and my throat feeling like sandpaper, that's it. That's the first tier list video. That is hopefully the longest one that there ever will be. The other feat lists are significantly shorter. Thank God for both that, you and me, because this is a long video. But thank you for watching. If you got to this point, let me know down in the comment section below that you got this far and what you think of the feats. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? Maybe you jumped through it. And whilst you're here, if you've been there this long listening to me talk, subscribe. You must like listening to me talk, and there's going to be a lot more of me talking. And hit that like button because it really helps the channel. Until next time, I've been Paul, and I will see you in the next video.